Hey fellow tankers, Mobius Y here with the next episode of my ongoing series, Mediums Forever. Here in episode 8, we're covering the next Chinese medium tank down the Chinese medium line, the T-34-1 Tier 7 Chinese medium tank. So, continuing with the Chinese medium tanks, this is where the Chinese tanks tend to kind of break off into their own element. They still bear a strong resemblance to a lot of the Russian configurations of medium tanks, but the Chinese mediums tend to start to really come into their own element by about this point at Tier 7 with the T-34-1. So a couple good things about the T-34-1. It has a pretty resilient turret, and it has a pretty dang good camo rating combined with not so bad mobility either. The T-34-1 also boasts a pretty powerful 100mm gun, which is quite potent for a Tier 7 medium tank. The only other two tanks that have as high a caliber gun are the Russian A-44 down the Object 430 line, which has a 107mm heavy tank gun, and the US T-20, which has a 90mm gun. So having a 100mm gun on a medium tank, obviously the gun handling is not that great on the T-34-1's final gun, but with such good alpha and high penetration, it's really easy to make your shots count, especially if you use the T-34-1's good mobility and camo rating to get in almost as close as you can really stand up to your targets. You don't really want to get within brawling range, as the armor and HP pool of this tank are quite lackluster on the T-34-1. So, first game here, minute into the first game on Lakeville here, I was trying to get into a position where I could potentially snipe some targets across the lake on Lakeville. We're very top tier, so I would not have had a problem penetrating those trying to move into the town. With 175mm of penetration on the top gun, that's no problem to penetrate the sides of any Tier 7 tank when you find yourself in a top tier game. And with 250 alpha damage, they'd be losing a fair chunk of health. Even a Tier 7 heavy tank would wind up losing a good fifth of its health. Unfortunately, the T-34-1 does not have very good view range, combined with its good camo rating. And neither did any of our tanks that went up to the middle. The medium tank that was there, as well as the T-1 heavy. Neither of us were able to spot any of their tanks moving into the town, unfortunately. So I wasn't able to get any shots there in the early portions of the game. A couple of other good things about the T-34-1. I did mention its armor is fairly lackluster. That's pretty much from all angles except when you're side scraping. The T-34-1 is actually a very potent side scraper due to the armor configuration that it has. Most of the side armor is a very flat 45 millimeters at a very flat angle, so it's very easy for anything to penetrate if they shoot you in the right spot. However, above the tracks there is some very well sloped pieces of armor that create a lot of ricochets, especially at people who try to land unaimed shots on you. They can wind up hitting those sloped pieces of armor at very strange angles, causing them to bounce unexpectedly. So you do get a little bit of leeway with the T-34-1 in regards to its side armor. I will point out though that the frontal armor is quite poor on the T-34-1. Most anything can penetrate you pretty easily, except for maybe some Tier 5s with very low penetration guns. They might struggle to penetrate the front plate of the T-34-1, especially if it's well sloped. But aside from that, there's not much that can't go through the front of this thing. Something else that's not so great on the T-34-1, you're still stuck with the 5 degrees of gun depression. This is the last tank in the medium tank line that gets 5 degrees of gun depression, as the Tier 8, Tier 9, and Tier 10 medium tanks all have a whopping 3 degrees of gun depression. So enjoy this 5 degrees while it lasts if you are grinding this line, as it is not going to get any better. In fact, it's going to get even worse after this tank. So we're actually just getting into the closing stages of this game, surprisingly, and it's only 4 minutes in. Got a very, very lucky shot on the enemy turreted TD that I just nailed, as well as the Japanese medium that I hit earlier. Also landing a lucky hit on the US T-40. At this range, the accuracy is really not that great, but it is adequate enough to the point where if you hit your target, The penetration and the alpha will do their work for you. You don't really have to aim too much at targets, even from that far away. Now a rogue Tier 7 IS heavy tank manages to get really close to me. I was able to put one shot into his hatch, but he did put one shot right through my upper front plate, taking out my driver very easily. Another aspect of the T-34-1, while the front armor is weak, it is also very vulnerable for your driver to get knocked out. And once again, there are fuel tanks mounted on the front of the T-34-1 opposite the driver, so it's very easy for this tank to get it set on fire as well. We'll definitely cover where the actual crew and module locations are shortly after we go over things like equipment and supplies. But all in all, despite the downfalls of the T-34-1, I definitely felt it was a pretty strong Tier 7 medium tank. The positives outweigh the negatives, I say. With a strong turret and even just 5 degrees of gun depression, you can make use of some very, very subtle depressions in certain parts of some maps. And with its decent side-scraping armor, you can work corners pretty well, especially if you find yourself top tier. Not so much if you're facing against a lot of Tier 9s with really good high-penetration guns, but when you wind up in a very top-tier game, it's very easy to make that side armor work for you through side-scraping. As you can see here, the gun handling on the T-34-1 is also fairly poor, because mounting such a high-caliber gun on, I'm going to say, an unstable chassis, a chassis more focused on mobility than stability, it doesn't aim in very quickly. The accuracy is kind of lackluster, and it doesn't really shoot straight very well. So the enemy team is already down to 1 tank left on this first game, and it's only 6 minutes into the game here. So we're trying to find this last Chiri. Most of my teammates wound up piling onto the flag. I guess they felt that our flag was threatened, but we didn't have eyes on this last guy. No idea where he was, so I was simply trying to race back to our base and see if I could find him to possibly get some more damage. I've already got 4 kills. I was looking to get another, maybe get a little bit more damage as well, but that's not what's going to happen in this case here. So as you can kind of see from this game, the T-34-1's penetration and alpha damage is quite respectable for a Tier 7 medium tank. The mobility is fairly good. The traverse rates are quite nice. The only downside of the T-34-1's mobility is it doesn't accelerate that great, but it can definitely kick up to a top speed pretty well, and the traverse speeds are also really nice. So lots of different aspects of the T-34-1 make it a pretty strong tank. So first game there, netted a high caliber, just under 2,400 damage in a very top tier game, getting almost 4,000 XP with my daily double that game. Very good turnout in that round there. Games like this were extremely common once I got the hang of this tank, and when I found myself top tier. It was very easy to rack up a good 2,000 plus damage in a top tier game, and sometimes even in a middle tier game, as like I said, the penetration of 175, more than enough, definitely more than enough APCR penetration as well to punch through tier 8 tanks very easily, hitting them for 250 damage per shot. So it's actually quite easy to rack up some damage with this tank. You only need about 4 or 5 full damage penetrations, and then you're dealing as much damage as you have HP, so you're essentially going positive. So quite easy to rack up damage pretty quickly with this tank, even with a long reload, such as with the 100mm final gun that you get on this. So let's take a look at the packages and the statistics on the final package that I used on the T-34-1. So starting off stock, you get the same 85mm S53 you should be familiar with from the Type 58. You also get the stock turret, stock engine, and stock treads. The mobility of the T-34-1 will be very lackluster on this stock package. If you have a little bit of free XP saved up, I do kind of recommend using just a tad, as this first upgrade to get the upgraded gun and engine does not cost very much. And then now this upgraded gun, you get another 85mm 5685 JT, pretty solid 85mm. Not a bad thing to stick with for quite a while here, and you do have to stick with it for a while before you can get to the final package. Now, as you may have noticed, even this first package is entirely optional from getting the next tank. As always, I highly recommend you always fully upgrade every tank before moving on to the next one, as researching these upgraded engines and guns will simply make the grinds on the higher tier tanks easier. That goes doubly so for these Chinese medium tanks. This second to last package, the T-34-1 Model 2, this is where you get the upgraded turret finally, as well as the top engine with the enhanced tread. So your mobility is in top form, and you're still mounting an adequate 85mm gun, which can pump out some DPM. It's simply a little bit lacking in penetration, and the alpha damage isn't too intimidating, so to speak, but it does have pretty decent DPM. Now, lastly, we get to the final package, the T-34-1 Model 2 100JT. The 100JT is the 100mm final gun that you get, giving you pretty decent alpha damage with really good penetration mounted on a Tier 7 medium tank. Let's take a look at the statistics. So the final engine gives you 520 horsepower. It doesn't sound too great, but this tank is not very heavy whatsoever, so the power to weight ratio is not super great, but it's fairly respectable. As I said, the traverse speeds on this tank are quite good. You get 42 degrees per second traverse speed in the tracks and 44 degrees per second traverse in the turret. So if you're turning the tracks one way, trying to turn the turret the other way, you will actually bring your turret around slowly, but it will eventually get there. And when turned together, they whip around really quickly, allowing you to put your gun where you need it to as soon as possible. The view range is also fairly decent. It's not great, but it's pretty good for a Tier 7 medium tank, 370. So if you were to mount optics on this tank, you would have over 400 meters base view range. The signal range, 750 meters. And the turret armor is rated at 170 in the front, 120 in the sides, and 60 in the rear. So very weak in the rear, but quite strong in the front and even in the sides with the sloping of the turret. Now, taking a look at the gun here, let's take a look at the good first. The penetration, as I said, with the standard AP rounds is 175. That's the same as, say, an IS-6 at Tier 8. The penetration with the APCR rounds is 235. That's 10 millimeters more than a fully upgraded IS-8 gets, which is a Tier 8 Russian heavy tank. So very adequate levels of penetration. You can easily get damage, especially with the APCR, even on Tier 9 tanks, so long as you know your weak points. The alpha damage on both of those types of rounds is 250 points of damage. Fairly respectable. You can, with a couple quick shots, even just 2, 3, or 4 shots, you can take out a large chunk of HP from Tier 7 and even some Tier 8 tanks pretty easily. The penetration on the HE rounds is 50. It's pretty good. And the alpha damage is 330. So surprisingly not much of an alpha damage increase for the HE rounds, but it is also always handy to carry a few of those. Useful for paper armor tanks, things like Nashorns at Tier 6 or even Hellcats, or even some Tier 7 tanks and Tier 8 tank destroyers like Borsigs, and so to speak. Now, the downsides of this 100mm gun, the rate of fire is only 6.45, so you're looking at almost a 10-second reload base. So without a gun rammer or brothers in arms on the crew, you've got about a 9.5 second reload base. You can reduce that to about 8 seconds or less with various equipment and the appropriate crew skills, but it is still a fairly long reload. The DPM on this tank isn't that good. It's simply made up for with good penetration and a respectable alpha damage. So the damage per shot is what really counts. You don't want to be sitting out in the open with the T-34-1 for extended periods of time, trying to dump shots on an enemy. You simply want to peek out, quickly aim in, take your shot, deal your damage, and then get back into the cover while you reload. Now, the aim time and accuracy of the final gun here, as I said, not that great. The aim time is 2.9, which is not very good, especially for a medium tank, and the overall accuracy is a pretty poor 0.41. There's a lot of tanks that have better accuracy than the T-34-1, so this thing is basically a second-line support tank. It is definitely capable of going frontline if it is a map that allows for it to side scrape on a very well-defended corner or a very high-intensity corner, or if there are certain parts of the map where you can get hull down while still bringing your gun to bear on the enemies using that whopping 5 degrees of gun depression, as the turret face is quite resilient and will stand up to a lot of Tier 7 guns, allowing you to rack up damage over a lengthy period of time with your long reload, just dumping shot after shot and reducing the amount of damage you might take in return. But for the most part, as I said, it is a second-line support tank, as you can expect from most medium tanks. But enough about that. Let's take a look at the equipment and supplies that I used on the T-34-1 to make it successful for me. So starting off with the supplies, I mounted a lot of standard AP rounds, 23. They were more than adequate to do the job that I needed to get done. If I found myself middle or bottom tier, I was always looking for open flanks or open avenues of attack where I could just get in on a tank's side and put even just one shot in. Every little lick of damage helps, even on a tier 9 heavy tank. If I low rolled for only 210 damage or so, it doesn't really matter. It was still worth it, getting some bonus XP and silver for hurting a tier 9 tank. For APCR, I only mounted 9. I didn't use these a heck of a lot, but I made sure that I had enough for when a situation arose where I really needed to kind of clutch the game as best as I could. And for high explosive, as I said, you don't really need to mount very much here. Only 2 is all I carry, because the extra alpha damage of 80 points doesn't really warrant carrying much more than that. Consumables, very standard, small repair, small first aid kit, and an automatic fire extinguisher. I highly recommend the automatic fire extinguisher because this is one of those Chinese tanks that has frontally mounted fuel tanks, and that is a common theme among a lot of Chinese tanks, so make sure you bring an automatic fire extinguisher. Preventative maintenance as a crew skill actually does not help, because preventative maintenance prevents engine fires, and the engine is in the back of the tank on the T-34-1, so you want an automatic fire extinguisher instead. Taking a look at the equipment that I used, I did mostly what I could to enhance the gun. I mounted a medium caliber tank gun rammer to reduce the loading time of the gun. I mounted an enhanced gun lane drive to reduce the aim time when I sat still, and I mounted coated optics to increase that view range. The view range, as I said, is not great, but it's pretty decent. So with the coated optics plus Brothers in Arms on the crew skill, I'm looking at least 410 meters of view range. Pretty solid view range combined with a really good camo rating on this tank made it actually a fairly effective active scout when needed. Not much else I'd recommend. If you want to change out equipment, you might want to swap out either optics or the gun lane drive, one of the two, and simply put on improved ventilation. That'd probably be your best choice for equipment to put on this tank. There's not really anything else that I can recommend in the equipment aside from the improved ventilation to increase the decrease the reload time as much as potentially possible there. So that's a look at the equipment and supplies. Let's take a look at the armor profile and soft stats on tanks.gg. Okay, here we are on tanks.gg, taking a look at the T-34-1 Tier 7 Chinese medium tank. So, starting off, as I said, the front of the turret is rated at 170 millimeters, so it's a pretty resilient turret front, and 150 millimeters just outside that on the sides of the turret, and 120 millimeters in the hatches and the sides of the turret. So, that is your strong point. Before you think about side scraping on a corner, which can be effective, you want to think about where can I go hull down. And a tank like this will really teach you various spots on the map where you might not have thought, that's not a good spot to go hull down. But with such a low profile tank, even the smallest divot can be used, so long as it's not to the point where you can't get your gun down with that 5 degrees of gun depression. As I said, the frontal hull armor is quite weak. It's only 60 millimeters sloped, so you get about 80 millimeters of effective armor. The lower front plate is quite weak, only about 60 millimeters effective, so it's very easy for things to punch through your front. The real saving grace protecting yourself in a more flat environment, as I said, is this side armor here. It's only 45 millimeters, just like the 45 millimeters beneath it, behind the tracks. But above the tracks here, it's quite well sloped. So at a side scraping angle, like so, even against a gun with pretty good penetration at about 170, 180, they will get a lot of auto ricochets. So people who wind up aiming for there will just auto ricochet off, and they'll get fairly frustrated. So you'd be basically poking out with your gun like this, and only this part of your front plate would be exposed. And while that is weak, they'd probably be more inclined to shoot at the side armor of your tank. As I said, 45 millimeters behind the tracks, very thin, very flat, easy to penetrate, especially if something flanks you. The back, nothing new here. 40 millimeters, very weak. I believe that's also where the engine and more fuel tanks are, so it's very easy to get set on fire there. And the back of the turret, a whopping 80 millimeters, so nothing too fancy there. Very weak everywhere except for the front of the turret, more or less. A couple of the soft stats. As I mentioned, the gun only gets 5 degrees of gun depression, and that's about 110 degrees on either side from the front. And then about 70 degrees to either side from the back, you get 0 gun depression. So be careful of that if you have a tank coming up behind you. You don't want to wind up with them below you, otherwise you won't be able to shoot them. It does get good elevation at 18 degrees though, so that is a definite positive. So let's just compare a couple of the soft stats with the previous tank, the Type 58, Tier 6 Chinese medium tank, just to get you a feel for the differences between the two. So even the Type 58 at Tier 6 has significantly more DPM than the T-34-1. So using the 85mm gun before you get the final 100mm, you'll be used to dumping out more DPM. But with the final 100mm gun, you're doing a lot more alpha damage per shot, and you have much better penetration at 175 over about 128. The reload time, a little over twice as long. Same thing with the rate of fire. So you've got twice the amount of time to hide behind cover to reload. The aim time is much worse. The dispersion, again, is a fair bit worse. And you lose a bit more of your accuracy when traversing a turret as opposed to moving or traversing a tank. So the dispersion while on the move is not much worse than the Type 58, but it is largely that much poorer aim time that will make the T-34-1 seem like a much more inaccurate tank compared to the Type 58. You do also get some changes in track and turret traverse. The turret traverse is a little bit worse on the T-34-1, and the track traverse is actually the exact same, which is pretty nice. The power to weight is just about identical, with a slightly worse top speed than the Type 58. So the mobility will feel largely the same as the Type 58, just a slightly slower top speed. So that's essentially a quick look at the T-34-1 Tier 7 Chinese medium tank. As I said, this thing is actually quite good when going hull down. You simply want to try and protect the hatches by wiggling your turret, as well as rocking back and forth, and where possible, if necessary, side scrape around a corner, provided you're not doing it against, say, Tier 9 tanks with really, really high caliber, high penetration guns. They'll simply punch right through you regardless. But against other Tier 7, side scraping is actually quite effective in this. So let's go ahead and take a look at the crew and module locations using images from worldoftanksinfo.net. Here's the front of the T-34-1. As I said, the front of the T-34-1, you've got fuel tanks on the right side of the tank, and opposite that you have the driver. So both of these modules get hit very easily, especially the driver. He seems to get knocked out more than the fuel tanks get damaged for some reason. So if you can spare the extra silver, I would definitely recommend a large first aid kit to reduce the chance of him getting critically injured. But if he does get injured, use your repair kit and fix him up right away. Keep your awesome mobility going. On the left side of the T-34-1, just behind the driver and the hull on the sides there, you've got ammo rack. So that's quite exposed. If you're coming around a corner on your left side, somebody who puts a shot trying to aim for your drive wheel or just behind it, there's a very good chance that they'll damage your ammo rack. So have your repair kit ready. The commander is underneath the hatch on the left side of the turret. Pretty difficult for him to get shot. This hatch is actually much smaller than the other one, and it's still fairly well protected. And as I said, in the very back of the hull, that's where you've got more fuel tanks. Taking a look at the back of the T-34-1, engine deck in the very back between the tracks there, as expected, and beneath that is a very big green weak zone as well. The back of the turret, there's ammo rack there, so if you manage to flank a T-34-1, hit it there, not only will you do some damage to it, but there's a very good chance you'll cripple its reload by damaging its ammo rack, making it take even longer to reload, a good 15 seconds or more. And on the right side of the T-34-1, the loader is underneath the right side of the right side hatch. That hatch is the more exposed one. It's still fairly resilient to lower pen guns. It's about 160 millimeters effective armor, but it can get penned by really accurate, really high pen guns if need be. Just in front of the loader, you got the gunner. Again, very difficult for him to get knocked out, especially if somebody's shooting your turret from the front, unless it's a super high pen gun, 200 plus penetration. Then they'll punch right through your turret. Fairly reliably, but not very well. The very back of the hull, on the right-hand side, there's more fuel tanks there. Easy to set a T-34-1 on fire. Anywhere in the back of the tank, more or less. You've got more ammo rack behind the tracks underneath the front end of the turret there. And you've got those fuel tanks that come all the way up underneath the turret there. So lots of fuel tank areas on the T-34-1 Tier 7 Chinese medium tank. Very easy for it to get set on fire. Obviously, but at the same time, it's still a pretty mobile tank. It can be a tough nut to crack if somebody is using it correctly and using it well and really knows what to do with it. So let's move on to our second game here. I've got a very bottom tier game here on Abbey Night, and it's an encounter match. And boy, have I got something special for you here in this game. I was not expecting the results that this game gave me here. So checking the loadout, as we can see, we're quite bottom tier. Not a huge amount. There's only a few tier 8s and a couple tier 9s on the other team, but it is still a bottom tier match. If I wind up in a one-on-one situation against that Object 430 version 2, for example, he would absolutely wreck me. So I knew to avoid him, and depending on the state of the E75's packages, he could easily destroy me in like 2 shots, if given the opportunity, and if he is fully upgraded. So starting things off into the match here, only 10 seconds in, I still wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I was debating just pushing straight up into the middle. I decided against it as I'm very bottom tier, so I decided I'm simply going to pull up onto this first kind of outcropping here where the standard battle spawns are, and take up a position to try and get shots down into the flag. I fully expected a couple people on the other team, maybe some of their scouts or their faster mediums, to push right onto the cap and put cap pressure on us right away, as a lot of people enjoy doing that, even though they usually get blown up in the first 2 minutes. It is what it is. So I fully expected that our scouts traveling down towards the flag here would actually light somebody up trying to do that. So I simply put myself in a position where I can't really see, but I know I can get shots down there if an enemy tank gets spotted. However, even with our scouts putting cap pressure on the flag, it doesn't seem like they're spotting anybody over there, so I'm simply keeping an eye on the map. Looks like several of them pushed south straight from their spawn to attack our team as well. Hopefully a couple of our top tier heavies moved due north to head them off. So it looks like a good half of the enemy team is still over there on the west side of the map. So I decided, okay, now's my time to move. It doesn't look like they've put any pressure on the cap. Our scouts have not spotted anybody, so I decided I'm going to move now. And that's when I get spotted. Not sure what from. I thought it might be something on the right-hand side, but then I realized, you know what, the guys on the left actually have eyes on me, and there's also an enemy T-20 right in the middle of the map there. So pulling forward just enough to start aiming on this T-20. I quickly snap off my shot before he moves out of range. A very unaimed shot, but RNG blessed me there and decided that the shot would go straight. So first damaging hit. It's only about 2 minutes into the game. So I only need about another 4 or 5 shots and I've hit my game's target of damage, which was about 1,500 in this tank. Now, if you're not sure what I mean by my game's target damage, whenever I play a tank, I set myself a target amount of damage to deal. It's based on a couple things. What targetdamage.com suggests, as well as the alpha and rate of fire of the gun, the top gun itself. I make my own determination for how much damage I feel like I want to do in this tank. I always say that people should push for at least dealing the amount of they should deal the same amount of damage that their tank has HP. At least start with that. At the very bare minimum, especially if you're fairly new to the game. Because if you can start pushing for those kind of amounts of damage, eventually you can start pushing that. And because this tank only has 1050 HP, basically making it a very easy 2-shot for a lot of tier 8 and most tier 9 tanks, I felt that about 1,500 damage, which is only 6 penetrating shots, I felt that was a fairly reasonable goal. So I got 2 shots into the side of a T-29 on the far left there, on the west flank. Was able to take him out. This Borsig pulled forward and spotted me. I don't know what kind of gun he has, and I don't really care, because if he's got the big 150 gun, he can easily blast most of my HP away, and I'll be one shot for pretty much anybody on the other team. If he's got the small gun, he still takes away half of my HP in one shot, so I don't really feel like losing all that HP in one go here. Trying to look for another shot here. I didn't have the gun depression to hit that Borsig. He would have easily lined up a shot and blasted me before I could even come all the way over top of the ridge to put a shot into him. That's one of the nuances of having 5 degrees of gun depression, is that poking ridges is a much more difficult kind of experience. So looking on the west side of the map, I saw that our Conqueror and E75, they seem to be in a little bit of trouble. Unfortunately, our Conqueror gets taken out, and now I'm simply trying to get over there to support our E75. Luckily for me, the E-75 is able to take out whatever heavy tank was giving him trouble. I wasn't quite sure what it was, but now it looks like the enemy Object 430 version 2 has closed in to try and take him out. I figured I'd simply regroup on the E-75's position to support him, but it looks like the Object 430 version 2 is not looking for a straight-up fight, so he simply drove straight past him. So I tried to position myself where I could ambush the object, simply whacking him with a quick APCR right as he came around the corner, and backing off before he could shoot me in return. So he's very low health. So I kept my APCR round loaded as he came around the corner here. I was fully expecting him to come up and try and fight it out, but I think he had a dirt moment, and he drove off the little cliff into the water below and wound up killing himself. So that's quite alright. There's another top tier enemy tank down with minimal effort. No complaints there. So there's still an enemy scout, an MT-25. There's still a T-34-1, a very bottom tier turreted tank destroyer. The MT-25 is behind us, back towards our artillery. But the enemy Borsig and E-75 are sitting on the flag and putting a lot of cap pressure on. It looks like our E-75 is it looks like the enemy E-75 is the one that's sitting on the flag, getting all the cap points. So I'm simply trying to flank around, come up behind him, get a good reset on him as we're running out of time. We're down to 10 seconds, and I have to make the shot count. So I loaded another APCR, came around behind, waited until the very last moment, and then I shot one. I actually was able to hit him in the back of the turret, not just damaging him, but also hitting him square in the ammo rack. So if he didn't use his repair kit, then he's shooting a lot slower than he should be. Luckily, my friendly heavies are keeping the E-75 distracted, so I can put a couple shots into his backside, still shooting APCR, just in case he decides to turn. And it's at this moment where he does decide to turn around. So backing up, I try to find a good spot where I can just put off an inaccurate shot at him, hoping for a Hail Mary kind of pen, but it doesn't happen. So my last two friendly heavy tanks, I believe the AMX 5100, he finally gets taken out. I think the Borsig got him. And the E-75 is able to take down the T-25-2 tank destroyer on the other team. So I know we're actually in a fairly dire situation. They still have a Borsig who can dish out a lot of damage. He already has, but he's very low on HP. So either me or the E-75 should be able to kill him, and then we can double team the enemy E-75. However, they still have their M53-55 artillery. So I didn't want to take my chances and continue attacking from the rear there, as that is where I was expected to come from. So I regrouped with our E-75 once again, also avoiding artillery, keeping the Abbey between me and the enemy artillery, not giving him an easy shot into me. Unfortunately, our E-75 lost a lot of HP. Now, inching forward, trying to spot this enemy E-75 who was on the flag once again. I got spotted. Wasn't able to see where the enemy E-75 was either. Another artillery shell flies over. He misses our friendly E-75, thankfully. So I decide, okay, I can be a little bit aggressive here. Let's just pull forward, see if I can get a spot. Enemy E-75 pops a shot off, but he hits the cliff, so I'm able to come out and aim just a little bit and try and get a reset on him. Unfortunately, the friendly E-75 gets taken out, and I am forced to inch forward and try and get a reset on this E-75 again. Doesn't look like the shot went straight, and it in fact seemed to go a little bit high into his side armor, causing me to ricochet off of it. So I load a little bit of APCR. I want to just buy myself some more time. E-75 comes out trying to attack me. I get a lucky bounce off the side of my turret. As you can see, I did mention that the turret sides can cause some bounces simply because they're pretty well sloped. They're fairly well armored, but they're also pretty well sloped. So I was able to get a reset on the E-75 one more time. Down to 2 APCR rounds now. So I knew at this point the E-75 was actually not fully upgraded, as if he had the fully upgraded gun, that would have penetrated my turret. The effective value was a good, about 200 and something with the way that I had the turret turned there. But if he had the fully upgraded gun, which has a good 240 pen or whatever it is, he would have easily gone through and erased half of my HP. So I knew he was stock. So now my attention turns to the Borsig. I know the Borsig is the larger threat now, as he has the much more powerful, much higher penetration gun. So I was able to get the full reset there on the E75. Even with both of them on the flag, I still got lots of time to get around. It's in counter, so I'm not worried about getting capped out at this point. But I was debating whether I should go for artillery first here. I decided not to. The Borsig was very weak on HP. I wanted to take advantage of that. I wanted to get that Borsig out of the game as soon as possible. So cutting in close, trying to stay unspotted until the very last minute. E75 finally spots me. I'm able to come around and pop a quick shot while on the move into the Borsig before he could get his gun around. I also spot artillery behind me. At this point, I am committed into the flag, so I know that there's no turning around to get the artillery. I'm committed to taking out this E75. Thankfully, I'm able to get beside him, put a nice shot into his side, trying to keep going around, take off some more HP. He's only a couple shots away from death, but then artillery for the 1-2 punch, and I'm taken out of the game. So a pretty exciting finish there, actually. That M53-55 had a much faster reload than I anticipated, unfortunately for me. But I was still able to knock out a really good game, even when bottom tier. 2685 damage with 11 penetrations, 320 damage blocked, netting 1,333 base XP. And just an overall really good game played. Also banked 10,000 silver, even with shooting all that APCR. The extra damage to the higher tier tanks definitely helped, for sure. Anyways, that's a look at the second game that I had saved for you guys. As I said, games like that, they were actually fairly common with the T-34-1, especially when I found myself top tier. Even if I was middle or bottom tier, it was still pretty easy to net 1,500 to 2,000 damage with the T-34-1. The alpha damage and the penetration capabilities of both the standard AP and the APCR rounds on the T-34-1 are more than enough where you can just get your damage in no matter what kind of situation you find yourself in. Unfortunately for the T-34-1, as I said, the armor is a little lackluster on it, so you do want to still play like a smart medium tank. Wait for your opportunities where you can peek out when nobody's looking at you or people are on a reload. And you need to peek out for a good 2 or 3 seconds so that you can aim your gun long enough where you can put your shot where you want it to go to guarantee that you're going to do damage. Otherwise, you're simply going to miss your shot and you'll have lost your opportunity. It's a very quirky tank, I found, but as I said, I felt the strengths outweighed the weaknesses of this Tier 7 medium tank, and I did quite enjoy playing it. By the time it was over, I was a little sad to sell it, as I had some absolutely ridiculously awesome games, most of which I did not record. Anyways, that's going to be it for this episode of Mediums Forever. I apologize for the slightly longer time spent on it, as the 2 games I used were pretty lengthy, especially the second one. But I do hope you enjoyed this episode of Mediums Forever. This has been Mobius Y, and I hope to see you in the next video. Happy tanking!